You ever have one of those moments where time seems to pause, where everything you trained for and prepared for narrows down to a single breath, a single choice that could change your life forever? Yeah, me too. Let me take you back to a place most of you have never heard of, and probably never will. A city that doesn't show up on tourist maps, where the streets have names nobody writes down anymore, and where dust hangs in the air like a permanent haze. We called it Mersak. Maybe the locals had an older name for it, something that translated to forgotten or cursed in their own language, but that part never made it into the brief. What mattered was the Tower Mersak. Tower 15 stories of aging concrete and rebar, rising out of the center of it all. From our perspective, it felt like the whole city tilted toward that building, and somewhere out past the rooftops and broken streets, I was getting ready to attempt the longest shot of my career from nearly a mile away. But that's getting ahead of the story. It really started with the weight of the rifle case in my hands as I stood in a crowded briefing room 3 days earlier, listening to officers in pressed uniforms outline a mission I knew I wouldn't forget. The briefing room smelled like old coffee and stress, the kind that settles into the walls of every base from Fort Bragg to Kandahar. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a tired yellow glow over the 6 of us at the table. There I was, my spotter Davis, quiet, sharp-eyed, catching every detail to intelligence officers who looked like they needed sleep more than anything, and a colonel whose name never stuck, because people rotate out, but missions stay. The colonel tapped a remote, and the projector came to life with a grainy satellite image. In the center of the frame stood Mersak Tower, rising out of what used to be a city square, now a contested zone controlled by hostile forces who had turned the district into a stronghold. "Gentlemen," the colonel said, his voice steady with long-practiced authority. "This is your objective." Another tap, and the image zoomed in on the structure windows blown out, concrete scarred, the tower dominating lower buildings around it, with streets below clogged by rubble and abandoned vehicles. "Mersak Tower has served as a command and control point for enemy elements for the last 8 months, he went on. "Intelligence indicates the upper floors are used for surveillance and coordination, and the lower levels for weapons and logistics. 2 reconnaissance teams have already failed to get close. Defenses are tight, and they're cautious." I leaned closer, tracing distances in my head from any realistic firing position. Even without numbers, it was obvious the range would push the limits of what a precision shot could do. "What kind of distance are we talking about, sir?" I asked. One of the intel officers, a thin woman behind wire-rimmed glasses, checked her notes. "Roughly 2,100 meters, she said. "Give or take 50, depending on where you establish your hide." 2,100 meters, just over a mile and a quarter. Not just a shot, but a calculation balanced on variables and luck. Davis shifted beside me, and I could feel him running the same math, arriving at the same conclusion. This was going to be difficult. "Who's the target?" I asked. The colonel advanced the slide to a profile photo. Mid-40s, beard, eyes that carried too many decisions. Khalil Rahman, former officer, now leading the network operating out of this sector. He's linked to multiple attacks on coalition forces, including the ambush that took Lieutenant Morrison's platoon last month. We expect him at Mersak Tower for a coordination meeting in the next 72 hours. That's your window. The room fell quiet as the weight of that name settled in. Morrison's unit had walked into a carefully planned kill zone. Most never made it back, and the survivors were still trying to put themselves together. "The mission has approval at the highest level," the colonel said. "You'll move in under cover of darkness, establish position, and wait for visual confirmation. Once Rahman is positively identified, you're cleared to engage. Extraction will be supported by air assets." "Any questions?" I had plenty, but asked the one that mattered most. "Weather, variable winds up to 15 knots from the northwest," the intel officer replied. "Temperatures between 95 and 105 Fahrenheit, humidity around 20%, no rain expected." So much for ideal shooting conditions. "Rules of engagement?" Davis asked. "Positive identification before any shot," the colonel. "Minimize collateral damage, but Rahman is priority. If you have a clean opportunity, you take it." "Understood." We nodded. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order presented politely. The briefing rolled on with talk of routes, extraction plans, comms procedures, and contingencies. If things went badly, but my attention kept drifting back to that distance. 2,100 meters. The record books talked about shots beyond 3,000 meters under perfect conditions with heavy caliber rifles. I'd stretched to 1,800 in the field and 2,000 in training. But this was a different kind of challenge, urban, hostile, where every window might hide a watcher and one mistake could mean we never made it home. When the session finally ended, the room emptied in silence. Davis and I walked straight to the armory, where the real preparation would begin. The armory was where everything finally made sense. It was the place I went to focus on tools of precision, where the noise of the outside world faded into the background. Bright fluorescent lights washed over steel tables, and the clean smell of oil and metal hung in the air. My rifle was already laid out on the bench, organized like a careful work in progress. It was a custom-built Chatak intervention in 408, designed to stay accurate well past 2,000 meters with the right setup. Matte black finish, adjustable stock, and a Schmidt and Bender scope with glass clear enough to pick out details at distances most. I named the rifle Patience because that's what this job needs most. Waiting, watching, and breathing steady when every instinct tells you to rush. Not just courage or talent, though those help, but the discipline to stay still for hours for a single moment that might never come. Davis sat up beside me with his spotting scope and range tools. We didn't need much conversation. We'd done this routine so many times that every movement felt like muscle memory. I started by breaking the rifle down completely, even though I had cleaned it only a few days earlier. When your life can depend on a piece of equipment, you double-check everything: springs, pins, contact surfaces, all cleaned, lubricated, and inspected. The barrel got extra attention. I ran patches through until they came out clean, then checked the rifling with a bore scope for anything that could disturb the shot. "Think the intel's as solid as they say?" Davis asked, still focused on his own gear. "Does it change what we have to do?" I replied. He gave a short laugh. "Guess not." Next came the ammunition. Each round was weighed, measured. Next came the ammunition. Each round was weighed, measured, and inspected one by one. Custom hand-loaded 419 grain brass projectiles tuned for consistency. At 2,100 meters, there's no room for shortcuts. Tiny variations in powder or casing can be the difference between a clean hit and a miss. I loaded 20 rounds into magazines and set another 10 aside as backup. If I ever needed more than that out there, something had gone very wrong. "You ever think about it?" Davis asked. After a quiet stretch, "Think about what?" "What?" The people at the other end of the scope. I turned around in my fingers, checking the brass under the light. "Do you ever think about it?" Davis asked. It was a question I'd heard in different forms from therapists, chaplains, and other snipers trying to square their job with their conscience. "Every day," I said, "but thinking about it doesn't change the reality. Out there, they'd take the same shot at us if they could. We didn't start this conflict. We're just trying to finish our part of it, one mission at a time." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it. Knowing something and living with it are two different things. You can understand the logic and still feel the weight of those choices when the base goes quiet at 3 in the morning. When the magazines were done, I shifted to the scope. The Schmidt & Bender was a piece of precision engineering, sharp optics, crisp adjustments, and enough magnification to read fine details at long range. None of that mattered, though, if it wasn't perfectly set up. I spent the next hour confirming every setting: reticle alignment, turret tracking, parallax adjustment, each click checked and rechecked. Then I mounted a laser bore sighter to make sure the optic and barrel were aligned within tight tolerances. Davis worked through his own checklist: spotting scope, rangefinder, weather meter, ballistic tools. His readings were just as critical as my trigger squeeze. Even a steady hand means nothing if the data is wrong. "You remember that shot in Fallujah?" he asked, carefully wiping his lens, the one through the tiny window. I let myself smile. The impossible one. That's the one. 1,200 meters, through an opening barely bigger than a shoebox, and the target visible for only a few seconds. "You made it look easy." "Nothing about that was easy," I said. The wind was shifting. The heat shimmer was warping the sight picture. and I had half a second to trust your range call and send it. By the book, that shot should have been a miss. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't. We fell quiet again. That shot was one of those moments I was proud of from a technical standpoint, and unsettled by on a personal one. I still remembered the brief glimpse of the man stepping into view, smiling at something, just alive in a normal human way, seconds before everything changed for him. That's the part people don't usually talk about with long-range work. They go on about equations, equipment, and ballistics, but not the closeness of watching someone through a scope for minutes at a time. You see how they move when they think they're alone? The way they adjust their gear, brush dust off their clothes, or react to a joke? It's not like firing into chaos in a crowded firefight, or dropping ordnance on coordinates on a screen. It's deliberate and focused, and you know exactly how personal that decision is. Some people manage to pack those memories away and never look back. That's never really worked for me. Every face and every moment is still there, filed away in sharp detail. When the rifle and optics were finally set, I started packing the rest of my gear. Beyond patience, my rifle, and the ammo. I needed everything that would keep me functional in the field. Camouflage netting, ghillie materials, water purification, dense rations, medical kit, comms, gear, batteries, and backups, plus 100 little items that turned bad situations survivable. Davis packed his load with the same methodical rhythm. His kit centered on information and support rangefinders, weather instruments, ballistic computers, target ID equipment, and enough redundancy to keep us running if something failed. "Weight check," he asked. I lifted my pack, around 80 pounds, plus the rifle. "Same here. We're going to be slow." "We're always slow," I said. He grinned. "Fair enough." Insertion would actually be the easy part, moving in with a small security element, using darkness and speed to get into position before sunrise. The hard part would be the wait. Hours, maybe days, of staying put, watching, conserving water and food, and never breaking concealment. It's not glamorous. Most of it is discomfort and patience, right up until everything compresses into a few seconds where all the training has to line up with reality. We finished packing as the sky outside shifted from blue to a deep mix of orange and purple, stars beginning to show through like tiny pinpoints of light. It was a reminder that the world could still look beautiful, even when our job meant stepping into the parts of it most people never see. "You ever think about walking away?" Davis asked suddenly. I glanced at him. He wasn't usually the philosophical one. "Every day," I said. "But to do what? This is what I know." Try explaining this work to people. Back home, half of them want to call you a hero, the other half a villain, and neither label fits. We're just soldiers doing a difficult job that someone has to handle. He nodded. "Still, after this, after Rahman, I keep wondering if it's time to try something else." "Like, what do you mean?" "I don't know. Teaching, coaching, mowing the lawn on weekends, the usual, quiet life." I smiled. "You'd be restless in a week." "Probably," he admitted. "But at least I'd be restless somewhere. Nobody's taking potshots at us." Hard to argue with that. We secured our gear and headed to the mess hall for what would likely be the last proper meal for a while. The food was standard issue overcooked meat, tired vegetables, and a strong coffee, but it was hot and filling, and that was enough. The room was quiet, with a few scattered conversations and the clink of cutlery. We took a table in the corner and ate mostly in silence, each lost in thoughts about what was coming. My mind kept circling back to the numbers. 2,100 meters meant about 3 seconds of flight time for the round, 3 seconds for gravity, wind, and even the Earth's rotation to play their part. At that distance, I'd have to aim several meters high to account for bullet drop, and even a modest crosswind could push the round significantly off course by the time it arrived. Wind is the real challenge. It changes from point to point, shifting in strength and direction between my position, mid-range, and the target area. You can measure it where you're lying, but downrange it becomes part science, part experience. That's where Davis earns his keep reading flags. Dust, mirage, vegetation, and turning all that into usable numbers. Even then, there's always a degree of uncertainty you simply have to accept. "You're overthinking it," Davis said, looking up from his tray. I usually do. Yeah, but this time, I can practically see the equations in your eyes, he said. I chuckled. Can you blame me? This shot is right on the edge of what's possible. We've dealt with long odds before, he said. And he was right. We had. But this felt different. The stakes were higher. The distance greater. As we finished our meal and walked out into the cool desert night, I knew this mission would test us in ways we hadn't been tested before. And as always, we would face it together. One detail, one calculation, and one breath at a time. We've handled unlikely, I corrected. There's a difference. He shrugged and finished his coffee. Either way, worrying won't change the physics. We prep, we trust the process, we take the opportunity if it comes. If it doesn't, we adapt. That's the job. That was Davis in a single paragraph, cutting through everything that complicates the picture and focusing on what we can actually control. It's why we worked so well together. I obsessed over variables. He kept us grounded. Because in the end, it would come down to a single shot that could save lives or cost them, depending on whether we got it right. After we finished eating, we headed back to the barracks to grab a few hours of sleep before stepping off. The building was quiet. Most people already out or gearing up for their own missions. I lay on my bunk, listening to generators in the distance and muffled voices down the hall, running through possibilities in my head. Sleep came late, as it usually did before operations. At some A-point exhaustion won, because the next thing I felt was Davis shaking my shoulder in the dark. Time to move, he said. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and started gearing up. Joints protesting, but routine carrying me through. Within minutes, we were outside, meeting the security Team 4 Rangers with tired eyes and ready gear. We've got 2 vehicles. There, Sergeant. Mitchie said quietly. We'll drop you about 3 clicks from your position. From there, you're on foot. We'll set up a perimeter and wait on your call. Questions? Timeline, I asked. 5 minutes to roll. 30-minute drive. Then you're moving. Sun's up in about 4 hours. So you'll want to be in place before then. Plenty of time as long as nothing went sideways. We climbed into the armored Humvees, worn from use and marked by dents and dust that hinted at past close calls. Inside, it smelled of fuel, sweat, and long days under armor. I settled into the back with my rifle case between my knees, Davis beside me. Both of us already shifting into mission focus as the engines turned over and the convoy rolled out into the dark. The ride out was quiet, just engine noise and the occasional burst of radio chatter that didn't concern me. Outside the windows, everything was dark. No street lights, no clear landmarks, just stretches of black broken now and then by the distant glow of fires or generators. We were leaving the relative safety of the base and moving into what the brief called disputed territory, a place where the margin for error was slim. I watched the darkness slide past, my mind already locked into mission mode. The nerves from earlier had settled into a familiar calm that always arrived when things got close. Not peace, exactly, but focus and clarity. All the background noise of life faded, and what remained was the task, the shot, the responsibility we were carrying. Davis sat beside me, just as quiet and focused. We'd done this enough times that we didn't need to talk. We both understood what was ahead and what would be expected of us. Eventually, the vehicles slowed and turned off the main road onto what was more track than road to worn lines in the dirt where others had driven before. We bounced along for another 10 minutes before coming to a stop. End of the line, Mitchell called from the front. Your position is northeast, about 2.8 clicks. We'll stay here on comes. You've got flares if things go bad, and air support is available, but it's 30 minutes out. Best if you don't need it. Roger that, I said, stepping down into the night. The air hit hot, dry, carrying dust and that faint scent of old stone. Above us, the sky was crowded with stars, the kind of view you only get far from city lights. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a pale river, beautiful, and completely separate from the work we were there to do. Davis and I moved away from the vehicles and paused to let our eyes adjust. We carried night vision gear, but those devices drain batteries and make a soft hum that can give you away if someone's listening closely. So we preferred to rely on natural night vision until we needed the tech. You good? I asked. Always, he said. We set off northeast at a steady pace. The ground was uneven loose rock, scattered debris from old fighting, and craters here and there. Movement had to be deliberate, each step placed carefully, every sound kept to a minimum. Because at night, even a kicked stone or a careless scrape could travel farther than you'd expect. The first kilometer took around 40 minutes, winding through what had once been a neighborhood. Buildings stood half-collapsed, roofs fallen in, walls open to the elements. Inside some of them, furniture still sat where it had been left: tables, couches, beds, like snapshots of a life that had been interrupted and never resumed. The second kilometer went slower. Here we were closer to areas under hostile control, and the chance of bumping into patrols or sentries grew with every step. Davis took point, scanning ahead with night vision, while I followed a few meters back, rifle ready and eyes working the shadows. We stuck to cover wherever possible, moving along walls, cutting through alleys, avoiding open ground. It was the kind of basic field craft drilled into soldiers from day one. But doing it in a place where people were actively watching for you added a layer of tension that no training exercise ever fully recreates. Halfway through that second kilometer, Davis raised a closed fist. I froze, scanning a moment later, I heard what he'd picked up. First voices speaking in a language I couldn't follow. Maybe 100 meters off to our left, a patrol moving through the ruins. We eased back against a broken wall and held still. Footsteps crunched on loose stone as the voices got closer. Through a gap in the masonry, I caught a glimpse of 4 figures with rifles, moving with the confidence of people who knew the ground well. They talked and laughed softly as they passed, unaware that 2 observers were less than 50 meters away. They moved on without noticing us, their sound fading into the night. We waited another few minutes to make sure they weren't looping back, then resumed our advance. The third kilometer brought Mirzak Tower into view. At first, it appeared only as a deeper shadow cutting into the sky, a block of darkness where the stars should have been. As we closed the distance, more details emerged: shattered windows, scarred walls, and a subtle lean that made the whole structure look like it was carrying its own history on tired shoulders. What stood out most, though, was the movement. Evenatite. The area around the tower was active. Shapes at doorways, sentries near the ground floor, brief flares of light from a lighter or a cigarette. Voices carried on still air. It was clear this wasn't just a regular building, it was a heavily used strongpoint. We located our planned position about 200 meters short of the designated firing site. A 3-story building, partially collapsed, with a clean line of sight toward the tower. Before committing, we checked for any signs that others had used at recently disturbed dust, fresh trash, shell casings, anything that might hint at another team. There was nothing obvious. The place felt untouched, which made it ideal. We climbed to the 3rd floor using a staircase that creaked and complained under our weight but stayed intact. The floor opened into what once had been an apartment rooms, separated by walls that were now broken or missing. The exterior wall facing Mirzak Tower had a large gap, likely from some old blast, giving us a natural observation and firing point. "Home sweet home," Davis murmured as he set down his pack. We spent the next hour turning the ruined room into a proper hide. First came camouflage netting, hung in shape to break up our outlines without blocking the field of view. The ghillie material was coarse against my skin, but it was necessary. I wove in bits of local debris, twigs, dust, fragments of whatever was lying around to disappear into the rubble. Every single adjustment was deliberate, a ritual built on years of practice and muscle memory. I assembled my shooting position with meticulous care. The rifle went onto its bipod, aligned with the precision of a surgeon. A small support bag nestled under the stock, ready for the tiniest adjustments in elevation. My gear, ammunition, rangefinder, wind meter, and ballistic calculator was laid out within easy reach, exactly the same way every time. A familiar pattern before a long, silent wait. Davis set up his station right beside me. His spotting scope went on a tripod, and he arranged his own range tools and weather instruments where he could grab them in an instant. In a way, it felt like we were setting up a small field laboratory, a temporary space where we'd measure and interpret every variable between us and the target. By the time we finished, the eastern horizon was just beginning to lighten. The deep black of night gave way to a rich blue, then the faintest hint of orange. Below us, the city slowly took shape. We could see the skeletons of collapsed structures, the dark husks of burned-out vehicles, and streets choked with debris, all of it outlined by the growing light. And at the very center of it all stood Merzak Tower, looking even more imposing in the quiet dawn. It was 15 stories of scarred concrete, pockmarked by old damage and studded with empty windows that stared out over the district like vacant eyes. The lower levels were clearly fortified. We could make out sandbags, reinforced positions, and possibly heavier weapons mounted in some of the openings. And there were people, dozens of them moving in and out of the entrances, crossing the courtyard and balconies with a relaxed confidence. It was the casual air of people who believe they are completely, untouchably safe. Davis leaned into his spotting scope, his voice low as he started calling out data. Main entrance, 2134 meters. Top floor balcony, 2157. Winds 325 knots from the northwest up here. But it looks different further out. I checked with my own rangefinder and got the same numbers. Over 1.25 miles. It was a distance. It felt almost abstract. Far enough that the bullet would drop many meters before impact. Far enough that its path would be bent by temperature, pressure, humidity, altitude, and even the subtle spin of the earth itself. This wasn't just a shot. It was a long, complex equation with countless opportunities for error. Temperatures at 97 and climbing, Davis added. Humidity, 23%. Pressure around 30.0. We're at roughly 1,500 feet above sea level, and the target's a bit higher. I entered the numbers and the details of my ammunition into the ballistic calculator, the bullet's weight, its muzzle velocity, its drag characteristics. The device crunched the data and returned an initial firing solution. About 18.4 mils of elevation, and a slight left hold to account for a moderate crosswind, but that was just the baseline, the starting point. Out in the real world, the wind shifts, temperatures drift, and the air density changes, especially over more than 2 kilometers of open, urban space. We'll need time on glass, I said. We had to watch the tower, track how people moved, and study how the wind and the mirage behaved over the distance. Could take a while, Davis replied, his voice calm. Hours. Maybe longer. Then we settle in, I said, and that's exactly what we did. Waiting. It's the hardest part of the job. It's not the technical complexity of the shot, not the physical risk, not even the moral questions that sometimes surface later. It's the endless hours spent lying perfectly still, watching the world through a lens, barely moving while every muscle in your body screams for you to shift, to stretch, to just do something. The first hours passed with agonizing slowness. The sun climbed higher, turning our small hide into an oven. Heat rolled off the concrete in waves, bending the view through a shimmering, watery mirage. Through the scope, I could see activity around Merzak Tower, but the distortion made fine details impossible to read. Davis moved between his spotting scope and rangefinder, logging guard routines, vehicle arrivals, and any patterns of movement, small, seemingly insignificant pieces of information that might become critical when the moment finally arrived. I kept my own attention fixed on the tower itself, building a mental map. The main entrance where guards congregated, the upper balconies that were sometimes empty, sometimes occupied, and the rooftop where figures occasionally appeared, likely spotters or coordinators. All the while, my thoughts kept circling back to the shot. At roughly 2,100 meters, a round would take a little over 3 seconds to reach its target, and that's in ideal conditions. In that brief window of flight time, the Earth's rotation, the changing air density, and every subtle shift in the wind would all leave their mark on the bullet's path. A few inches of drift at that distance was the difference between a precise, effective hit and a complete, useless miss. The wind was the biggest variable, the true ghost in the machine. I could see flags and loose pieces of fabric along the bullet's potential route, and they were all moving differently. Near us, the breeze was light, maybe for knots, but farther out, a single flag on a distant building snapped much harder and closer to the tower. I could see dust swirling in small, unstable patterns. Reading that kind of complex airflow over such a long distance is part science, part practiced intuition. You watch the indicators, you compare them, and you trust your experience. when the numbers alone just aren't perfect. "Movement on the 3rd floor," Davis murmured, his voice breaking the long silence. "East side balcony, 2 armed." I shifted my scope to the spot he indicated. 2 men with rifles stood there, talking and smoking. They looked relaxed, probably thinking more about lunch or home than about a potential threat miles away. In a few hours, one of them could become the focus of my crosshairs, or they might just leave and never, ever realize how close they came to being a part of my day. "Noted," I said, sliding my scope back to the main entrance. Time dragged on. The sun reached its peak, turning our hide into a stifling, oppressive box. Sweat soaked through my gear, stung my eyes, and traced salty lines down my face. But I couldn't risk any broad movements, not even to wipe it away, so I stayed still, breathing slow and steady, keeping my mind locked on the image in my scope instead of the growing discomfort. Around midday, Davis nudged me gently and passed over a water pouch and an energy bar. We ate and drank in small, careful motions. Every calorie, every mouthful of water mattered. We had supplies for a few days at most, and getting resupplied this deep in hostile territory was basically impossible. "You see that?" he whispered, pointing with a slight nod. A convoy was approaching the Tower 3 trucks and a civilian-style SUV. They rolled right up to the entrance. People began to disembark, many of them heavily armed, forming a visible ring of security around that one SUV. "This might be it," I said. I could feel my heart rate tick up a notch, but my training kept my body perfectly still and my movements controlled. A man stepped out of the SUV. He was middle-aged, bearded, and moved with a kind of innate confidence that made everyone around him pay immediate attention. Even through the shimmering heat haze, the way the others deferred to him, the way they moved around him, told me he was important. Davis locked onto him with the spotting scope, comparing the figure to the images from our briefing. "Could be Rahman," he said, his voice tense. "But I can't lock it in. There's just too much distortion." We watched as the man and his escort disappeared inside the tower. The engines on the vehicles were left running, and the drivers lingered nearby, ready to move at a moment's notice. "If that's him, he's ahead of schedule," I said. "Intel's never exact," Davis replied flatly. Over the next few hours, more vehicles came and went. More armed personnel arrived. The level of activity around the tower spiked dramatically. Whatever was happening inside, it was important. But until we had a clear, confirmed visual on our target, there was no shot to take. As the sun began to drop toward the horizon, the oppressive heat shimmer finally started to ease. The picture in our scopes sharpened. Facial features, body language, even small gestures started to come into focus with much greater clarity. And that was when he appeared. Rahman stepped out onto a 5th-floor balcony. He was surrounded by several others, and he was gesturing out toward different parts of the city below him. Even at more than a mile away, something in his posture, in the way the group deferred to him, matched every single detail from our briefings. Davis checked and rechecked. His focus. Absolute. Comparing. Yeah. That's him. That's Rahman. The wait was over. My pulse surged, then settled into the steady rhythm conditioned by years of training. This was the chance. But the balcony was crowded, and the wind had picked up. Flags showed 8 to 10 knots from the northwest, pulsing in gusts. A rushed shot here risked clipping someone else or missing entirely. "Wind's too unstable," I said. "We wait for a cleaner window." "He's not heading out yet," Davis replied. "Look at all those vehicles. They resettled in. This is going to run long." So we kept watching. Rahman stayed on the balcony for several minutes, talking, pointing, directing, then stepped back inside, swallowed by the dark interior. Hours slid by. The sun set, washing the sky in deep reds and oranges that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. With night came a drop in temperature and a small measure of physical relief. Lights flickered on inside Mirzak Tower, generator fed and uneven, but bright enough to outline movement at windows and on balconies. "We're in for a long one," Davis said quietly. "Looks like it," I answered. We rotated between watching and resting, one on the glass, while the other tried to grab shallow half-aware sleep. No one truly sleeps deeply in a place like that. Part of you always stays tuned to the environment, ready to snap back in an instant. During my watch, the pattern continued. More vehicles arriving even after dark, more armed escorts, more subtle signs that this gathering mattered. Around midnight, Rahman appeared again, this time higher up 8th or 9th floor, standing on a balcony, smoking and looking out over the ruined city while others kept a respectful distance behind him. The line of sight was clean, the wind calmer, and the target relatively still. For a moment, it felt like the shot was there, but shooting at night at that distance with only night optics, with one chance and no margin for error, was a gamble. A miss could reveal our position and cost us every chance we had. "Hold," Davis whispered. "Wait for daylight and better air. We've got him pinned to this place now." He was right. Every instinct pushed me toward taking the opportunity, but experience said to wait. I watched Rahman finish his cigarette and head back inside before turning the scope over to Davis and shutting my eyes for a while, mind still running the numbers in the background. Dawn crept in, gradually, washing the city in gray before blue. I was back on the scope before the sun cleared the horizon, watching tower details sharpen and shadows shorten. Activity had dropped compared to the night before, fewer people visible, fewer vehicles moving. Whatever they had gathered for seemed close to wrapping up, which meant Rahman might try to leave soon. "Wind read?" I asked. "For knots from the northwest here," Davis said. "Downrange flags show about 6 to 8. Mirage is light. These are some of the best conditions we're likely to see." I checked my own cues dust near the tower. Subtle waves of mirage, fabric on distant lines. The air wasn't perfect, but it was stable enough to work with. "Range to that 5th floor balcony?" I asked. 2.46 meters, he answered. I fed the current values into the ballistic calculator range, bullet data, temperature, humidity, and wind. The solution called for about 18.6 mils of elevation and a left hold to account for the crosswind. That was the math. The real shot would require slight corrections based on what we saw in the moment. "We wait for him," I said, "and we hope he gives us something clean." We didn't wait long. By 7:15 a.m., the sun was up. Shadows were long, and the temperature was already climbing, which meant mirage would soon start to blur everything again. On-the-ground movement around vehicles suggested prep for departure. "Ground floor's busy," Davis noted. "They're staging a convoy. He could be leaving." If Rahman left by vehicle, our chance was essentially gone. At Thatranjay, on moving targets with that many people and structures in play, the risk of collateral damage would be too high. Minutes stretched out, and each one felt heavier than the last. I focused on keeping my breathing even, watching the reticle's tiny movement with each heartbeat and working to minimize it. "Convoys forming," Davis said. "Trucks and SUVs. Full security setup. This looks like VIP movement." We needed him to appear. Then, did. Rahman stepped back onto the same 5th floor balcony. 2 bodyguards in close, tan vest, white shirt, dark pants, moving with the self-assurance of someone used to being protected. He paused there, looking down over the vehicles like he was inspecting his own small kingdom. "Confirmed," Davis said, voice tight. "That's him." Is solid. Everything else faded from my awareness. The discomfort, the fatigue, even the risk, all collapsed into a narrow tunnel between my eye and the man in the crosshairs range. I asked, 2-1-4-6. "No change," Davis replied. "Wind 5 knots from the northwest here. Mid-range flag near the mosque shows 6 to 7. Near the tower, dust looks like 7 to 8. Same direction." I adjusted my mental picture. At that distance, that wind meant holding nearly 2 mils left, roughly the width of a couple of feet at the target. The bullet would rise in its arc, peak high above the line of sight, and then drop back in, arriving about 3 seconds after the trigger break. "Temperature?" I asked. 91, and climbing. Humidity around 20. Warmer, thinner air. Meant slightly less drop than in cooler, denser air, so I made a small adjustment to elevation to match. On take ground, the convoy continued to tighten up, security posture sharpening. If he stepped inside now, we were done. I settled into position, cheeked firm on the stock, shoulder braced, reticle floating just where it needed to be with the wind hold. Heartbeats were visible through the glass as tiny tremors. I timed my breathing to calm them. That was when the radio cut in with a jolt of static. Overwatch, this is Raven 6 picking up movement. Toward your building, multiple armed, conducting a sweep. Estimate 15 to 20, closing from the south. Recommend immediate exfil. My finger came off the trigger. Confirm approach? I asked quietly. Moving through the ruins, about 200 meters out. They're checking structures. 10 to 15 minutes. Until they reach you. I met Davis's eyes for a second. Somehow, our position had made their list. On the balcony, Rahman was still there, still exposed, still in range. What's the call? Davis asked. It came down to the mission statement. Rahman was the top priority. I'm taking the shot, I said. As soon as this round is out, we're moving. Davis nodded once and began stripping his station down, packing only what we'd need to escape and leaving anything that would slow us. I went back to the glass. Rahman stood in almost the same spot. Still talking, still unaware, but the wind had changed. Flags and dust near the tower showed stronger, more erratic gusts, closer to 10 or 12 knots. Wind just jumped. Davis confirmed, sustained around 10, gusting higher. I shifted my hold further left, knowing that at this range, a 10-knot crosswind could shove the round almost a meter off course, if unaccounted for. Hostiles at about 150 meters and closing. The radio updated. Ramon began to turn back toward the doorway. This was the last chance. I drew a slow breath and let it out halfway, feeling everything settle. The reticle steadied on where his chest would be as the wind pushed across the line of fire. The trigger broke cleanly under my finger, exactly as it should. The rifle recoiled into my shoulder sharp, controlled familiarly. When the scope came back on target, I could see the faint trace of the bullet zapath, a tiny distortion in the air as it climbed, curved, and began to fall toward the balcony. 3-point-something seconds is a lifetime when you're watching through glass, knowing that every calculation, every call, every bit of training has led to that tiny moving point in space. Rahman was still in frame, still mid-gesture, still unaware that anything had changed, and then the round reached its destination. Impact. The round hit from on high in the chest, just below his left shoulder. He staggered once and went down instantly, collapsing on the balcony while his bodyguards froze for a heartbeat, trying to understand what had just happened. Hit, Davis said, his voice tight with adrenaline. Target down. That's a confirmed kill. For a brief second, there was only a cold sense of completion. The mission goal had been achieved. Rahman was no longer giving orders. Then everything else rushed back in at once. We need to move, Davis said, already throwing on his pack. Those hostiles are probably within 100 meters. I broke the rifle down from the bipod, checked the chamber empty and fed in a fresh round before safing it and collapsing the legs. Gear went into my pack in a practiced sequence while Davies pulled down the camouflage netting and kicked debris over our position to hide any obvious signs we'd been there. Roughly 30 seconds from shot 2 packed. Not our best, but fast enough. Raven 6, Overwatch. I called on the radio. Target is down. Confirmed. We're moving to exfil point Delta. Update on hostile movement. Overwatch. They heard the shot, came the reply. They're closing fast, about 75 meters from your building. You need to move. Air support is inbound, but at least 20 minutes out. 20 minutes might as well have been a lifetime. We headed for the stairwell. Rifles up. The structure creaked around us, damaged and unstable. So we moved quickly, but carefully. One bad step and a broken ankle would end the mission right there. On the second floor landing, voices drifted up from below. Urgent. Close. They had already reached the building. Going down meant running straight into them. Going up would trap us on the roof. Window, Davis whispered, nodding toward a broken opening that looked into a narrow alley. The drop was around 3 meters to rubble. Not ideal, but better than a stairwell fight. Davis went first, hanging from the frame and dropping into a controlled roll. I followed, landing heavier under the weight of my pack, a jolt of pain running up through my ankles that I pushed aside. We moved through the alley, weapons ready, listening to shouts echoing from the building behind us. They'd found where we'd been. Now they'd spread out to look for where we'd gone. This way, Davis said, angling us north through broken streets. The neighborhood was a maze of collapsed houses and burned-out vehicles. Every corner a possible ambush point. Gunfire cracked somewhere behind us, not directed fire yet. More like attempts to flush us out, but it was proof the net was tightening. Overwatch. Be advised. Additional hostiles moving from the east. Raven-Seeks warned. You've got an estimated 30 to 40 people searching now. Copy. Best route to Delta. Primera. Asket. Northwest. Through the ruins. You'll have to cross the main streets exposed. Of course it was. We hugged a half-collapsed wall and studied the road ahead. 50 meters of open ground, then more cover. No movement, Davis said after a scan. Doesn't mean it's clear. We waited as long as we could. Voices behind us grew closer. Time was running out. On 3, we cross, I said. You go first. I cover. If they open up, you keep moving. He nodded. 1, 2, 3. Davis sprinted low across the street. He made it halfway before muzzle flashes lit up from a building off to our right. Second floor. Rounds snapped past him, kicking up dust. He dove behind a burned-out car as I returned fire toward the windows, sending a short string of shots to force their heads down rather than trying for precise hits at that moment. Move, Primera, shouted. He pushed off and finished the run to cover on the far side. I broke from my position next, sprinting across the same open ground while stray rounds cut the air around me. Every step felt like it might be the one where something caught up with me. But somehow I reached the other side and dropped in next to Davis, lungs burning. You good? He asked. Still here, I answered. You? Same. More shouting erupted behind us. They knew the direction we'd gone, even if they'd lost visual contact. Overwatch. Multiple signatures converging. Raven-Seeks's voice crackled in my ear. You need higher ground for extraction. Can you make checkpoint 3? I checked my GPS. Checkpoint 3 was 300 meters northwest. Affirm. Moving now, 5 minutes. We pushed on, weaving through the ruins. The streets blurred into a confusing maze of shattered buildings. We crossed another open street under sporadic fire, ducking behind a ruined mosque with a collapsed minaret, its floor littered with glass and old brass casings. 200 meters, Davis called out, glancing at his own GPS. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer again. They were fast, and they knew this terrain far better than we did. There, Davis pointed. Checkpoint 3. It was a relatively intact 4-story building. The roof would give us a perfect landing zone and a defensible position. We ran the last stretch, slipping through the open entrance, and found the stairwell. Up for flights on exhausted legs, then a short climb through a roof hatch, and we were on top. We were breathless, but still moving. The roof was flat with a low parapet wall. Davis dropped into a corner, getting good angles on the access point and the streets below. I took the opposite corner to cover another sector. Raven-Seeks. Overwatch on checkpoint 3, I reported. Taking pressure. Where's the bird? 7 minutes. Can you hold? We'll hold. Below, more armed men appeared in the streets, moving cautiously, scanning the upper floors of the buildings. We held our fire at first, hoping to buy some time, praying they'd keep searching other buildings. But it was no use. One of them eventually looked up and pointed right at us. Gunfire erupted toward the roof. Rounds chewed into the wall in front of us, sending concrete dust flying. Davis and I returned controlled bursts, dropping a couple of shooters and forcing the others to scramble for cover. Overwatch Technico, Inbound with a mounted gun, Raven 6 warned. 2 minutes out. A pickup truck with a heavy machine gun was the last thing we needed. A Lowell wouldn't do much against that kind of firepower. How far for the helo? I asked, my voice tight. 4 minutes. The technical rolled into view 2 blocks away. It was a standard pickup, but with a crew-served weapon bolted into the bed. I focused on the gunner, squeezed the trigger, and watched the round hit him hard enough to knock him right off the mount. The truck swerved into a pile of rubble. It wasn't over. Another fighter immediately climbed up to take his place and began firing long bursts toward our position on the roof. The sound and impact of that weapon were overwhelming. It tore huge chunks out of the concrete wall right in front of us. I stayed low, waiting for a pause in the firing, then popped up just long enough to send 2 more shots toward the gunner. One finally found its mark and dropped him, but another man immediately moved to take over. Overwatch, this is Angel 7. A new voice broke in over the It was the helicopter pilot. I have your position. High volume of fire in your area. Hot extract, pop smoke, and stand by. I pulled a smoke grenade from my vest, popped the pin, and rolled it across the roof. A cloud of colored smoke billowed up, marking our position for the pilot. The deep thump-thump-thump of rotor blades grew louder as the Black Hawk came into view, flying fast and low. Its door guns opened up, stitching fiery arcs through the streets below, forcing many of the hostiles to dive for cover. Move, 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 the crew chief shouted as the helicopter flared and hovered just above the roof. Davis ran first, diving into the cabin. I followed right behind him, moving through the thick smoke. But just as I reached for the door, something hit me in the side like a sledgehammer. He spooned around, dropped to one knee, and then felt strong hands grab my vest and haul me inside. The pilot didn't wait. The helicopter lifted immediately, climbing fast out of the kill zone while the door gunners kept up their suppressive fire. "Where are you hit?" Davis asked, already pulling at my gear to get a look. I did a quick check. Arms and legs were functional. Plates were intact. A burning line along my right side told the rest of the story. The round had passed through my pack first, losing most of its energy, then scored a deep groove along my flank. It was painful, but not catastrophic. "You're lucky," Davis muttered as he poured antiseptic on the wound and wrapped it tight. Another inch and we'd be having a very different conversation. The crew chief gave the dressing a quick look and nodded. "Looks clean enough for now. We'll get you checked properly back at base," he said. The city slid away beneath us as the Black Hawk banked toward friendly territory. From the open door, I could still see Mirzak Tower rising above the ruins. A single balcony on its 5th floor, now part of a very different story. Angel 7 to Raven 6, the pilot reported. Package secure. 2 personnel on board, 1 with minor wound. RTB. Copy. Angel 7. Good work. The flight back took about 20 minutes, just enough time for the adrenaline to fade and the ache in my muscles, shoulders, and feet to set in. I'd made a shot most would call nearly impossible, taken out a man responsible for plenty of pain on our side, and walked away with nothing worse than a graze and a new scar. Across from me, Davis just stared into the middle distance, processing the morning in his own way. We didn't need to talk. Everything important had already been said in calls, corrections, and shared glances on that rooftop. The crew chief handed us bottles of water, and we drank in silence. We were tirade sore and scraped up butt. We were alive, Roman was not. Sometimes, that is what success looks like in this line of work. The team back on the bird, the target no longer giving orders, and everyone's still breathing long enough to think about what comes next. We landed at the forward operating base about half an hour later. Medical staff were waiting as soon as the helicopter touched down, checking us over, asking quick questions, and making sure nothing serious had been missed in the field. A medic cleaned and redressed the wound on my side, confirming what Davis and I already suspected. It looked dramatic, but it wasn't critical. Painful, sure, and it would slow me down for a while. But with some rest I'd be cleared for full duty in a couple of weeks. Davis, somehow, had made it through without so much as a scratch. Next came the debrief. We were taken to a windowless, concrete building. The kind of place where sensitive conversations happen and little ever leaves the room. The colonel from the original briefing sat at the table, joined by several intelligence officers and a few civilians who didn't offer their names. They had us walk through the mission from start to finish, every decision, every movement, every round we fired. Davis and I filled in details for each other, building a full, comprehensive account of how the operation had unfolded. When we reached the moment of the shot, the room fell quiet. 2,146 meters. That's what the intel officer said, her eyes flicking down to her notes. Variable wind, incoming hostiles, time pressure. She looked up at me. That's an exceptional engagement. It's what I'm trained for, I answered, the words feeling hollow. It's more than that, the colonel added, his voice firm. That's among the longest confirmed shots on record, and you pulled it off under very difficult conditions. Sir, with respect, I'm not worried about records. What matters is that Rahman is off the board. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. And he is. Our sources on the ground have confirmed it. His network is already splitting without him, and we expect a serious drop in their ability to coordinate attacks in this area. How many lives does that protect? The question came out before I could stop it. Hard to measure, he replied honestly. But he was planning operations it could have cost dozens, maybe hundreds of lives on both the military and civilian side. Taking him out prevents those from happening. It should have felt like a clean victory, a mission accomplished. But mostly, I just felt drained, older than I had been the day before, and ready to sleep for as long as anyone would let me. The debriefing continued for another hour. They wanted every detail about our escape, the running gunfight on the way to extraction, the technical with the mounted gun that had nearly pinned us down. How many people had been in pursuit? What gear did they carry? How organized did they seem? Question after question, until finally they released us. "Hitsome rest," the colonel said. "You've earned it. We'll need a full written report within 48 hours. But for now, take care of yourselves." Back outside, the afternoon sun felt unnaturally bright. The base moved at its usual, steady tempo, vehicles rolling by, helicopters cycling in and out of the landing zone, people striding with purpose toward their next task. It all looked so routine, so completely separate from the chaos we'd just clawed our way through. "You know what I want?" Davis said as we walked, his voice raspy with dust and exhaustion. "What's that?" "A real shower, a meal that didn't start its life in a sealed pouch, and about 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep." I couldn't argue with that. We made our way toward the barracks, both of us moving a little slower now that the adrenaline was finally gone. Other soldiers gave us quick, knowing looks. The dusty uniforms, the gear still hanging off us, the weary lines on our faces, it all told its own story. At the barracks door, Davis paused. "That shot on Rahman," he said, his voice low. "I've worked with a lot of snipers over the years. That was something special. Just wanted you to know. We did it together," I told him. "I pulled the trigger, but you gave me the numbers and the calls. That's how this works." He nodded. "Still felt like an honor to be on that glass with you." "The feeling's mutual," I said, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. We split up then, each heading to our own small space to decompress. I stripped out of the filthy gear, methodically checking my weapons. My rifle, patience, had come through without any issues. I locked everything away securely. Then I stood under a lukewarm shower and just watched the grime and dried blood wash off me, swirling into the drain and disappearing. The memories, though, they stayed right where they were. My thoughts went back to Rahman on that balcony, to the moment he dropped without ever knowing where the danger came from. I thought about the young fighter in the street during our escape, about how young he looked, about the possibility that he had a family and plans and a life that existed beyond this fight. Faces blurred together, every person I'd ever watched through a scope, every life that was irrevocably changed in the tiny instant between one heartbeat and the next. Davis's question from the armory echoed in my head. "You ever think about it?" The faces? Yeah. I thought about it every single day. But thinking about it didn't change the hard reality. There are people like Rahman in the world, people ready to create as much harm as they possibly can if no one stops them. And sometimes, Stopping them means a long-range shot, taken by someone willing to live with the immense weight of that choice. I dried off, lay down on my bunk, and sleep hit me like a physical blow. It brought dreams full of tall towers, wavering crosshairs, and faces I knew wouldn't fade, no matter how much I might wish they would. 12 hours later, a sharp knocking at the door dragged me back to consciousness. For a split second, I was disoriented, my hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, until it all sank in. I was in my room, on base. The mission was, at least officially, over. "Yeah?" I called out. The door opened, and Davis stepped in. He looked cleaner, more rested than before, but there was a new tension in his posture. "They want us in the briefing room again," he said. "Something's come up." The brief wave of calm I'd felt from sleep vanished instantly. What kind of something? They didn't say, just told us to get there fast. I threw on my uniform, ignoring the dull ache in my side, and followed him back to the same briefing building. The familiar faces from the debrief were there, along with a few new ones. The colonel looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the quiet room. "We have a situation." He brought up an image on the main screen, a large, 3-story building that looked like a government office or maybe a school. "This is a municipal facility in the city, with around 40 civilians inside, administrators, teachers, support staff," he explained. 2 hours ago, it was seized by a group led by Nasir al-Kuwaiti, one of Rahman's former lieutenants. "They're holding everyone inside and have issued demands." He paused, and a cold certainty settled in my gut. We weren't going to like what came next. They want the Americans who took out Rahman, specifically the 2 of you. They're demanding you in exchange for the hostages. The room went completely still. The hum of the projector was the only sound. "They've given us 24 hours, the colonel continued, his gaze fixed on us. "After that, they say they'll begin killing hostages, 1 per hour, until their demands are met." I glanced at Davis. The weight in his expression perfectly matched the crushing pressure I felt in my own chest. "Obviously, we're not handing you over," the colonel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But we do have to find a way to resolve this before people start dying. We need options. Now." One of the intelligence officers leaned in. "We're modeling an assault fast-rope insertion from helicopters, breach, and clearance," he said quickly. "But the building is highly defensible. They're prepared, and the risk to the hostages is very high. Even in the best-case scenario, we're expecting casualties on both sides." "Any progress with negotiations?" Davis asked. "We tried. They're not interested in talking," came the blunt reply. "They want retaliation. An eye for an eye. They see Roman's death as something that has to be answered." I looked at the image on the screen, at the solid walls and dark windows, at the different floors where innocent people were now sitting, waiting, while their time ran down. These civilians were in danger, at least partly, because I had done exactly what I was asked to do. "There has to be another way," I said, the words feeling small in the heavy silence of the room. "There just has to be." "We're listening," the colonel answered. It was clear the mission hadn't really ended with that balcony shot. Rahman was gone, but the effects of his removal were still unfolding, pushing new problems to the surface. I studied the photograph, thinking about the people inside, the men guarding them, and the angles that might exist between buildings, rooftops, and streets. All the same factors as before: distance, line of sight, timing were there, just waiting to be mapped. "Show me the building layout," I said, and pulled the satellite imagery for the area around it. "If there's a way to solve this from a distance, I'll find it." The colonel gave a grim, approving nod. That's exactly what we were hoping to hear. The briefing room turned into a war room in minutes. Maps were spread across the table, satellite images lit the screens, and intelligence officers moved from call to call, coordinating with teams on the ground. The atmosphere shifted from post-mission analysis to active crisis planning, and the weight of 40 civilian lives hung over every decision. "Here's what we have," the colonel said, indicating a high-resolution satellite image of the municipal building. 3 stories, reinforced concrete, built in the 70s. Main entrance here on the east side, secondary exits on the north and south. Windows on all levels, most still intact. Where are they holding the hostages? I asked. The wire-rimmed intel officer pulled up a thermal overlay. Heat signatures suggest the hostages are concentrated on the second floor. Eastern side, likely a large room, maybe a hall or cafeteria. And the militants spread across the building, she said. We're reading 15 to 20 distinct signatures matching patrol and sentry patterns guards on each level. Mobile elements, and what looks like a command group on the third floor. I studied the images. The Raman engagement had been difficult, but straightforward, one primary target in a predictable zone. This was different. A crowded structure where one bad decision could cost many innocent lives. Distance from the best shooting positions? I asked. It varies, she replied. There's a 4-story structure to the southeast at about 1,800 meters. Another option to the west around 2,200 meters, but with partial obstruction. There's also a water tower to the north at 1,600 meters, but it's very exposed. 1,800 meters was well within what I could handle, especially after the Mirzak tower shot. The harder part wasn't ranged, was choosing the right moment and the right person. I need to know exactly who the target is, I said. With hostages in play, one wrong round could trigger panic or retaliations. We're focused on Nasir al-Kuwaiti, the colonel said. He's leading this operation and issuing the demands. Take him out and the whole structure may destabilize. Or it could get worse, Davis said. No clear leader. Nervous fighters. Hostages in every room that can turn ugly fast. He wasn't wrong. This wouldn't be a simple leadership removal. It had to sync with a larger move. What's the assault element? I asked. Delta staged, the colonel replied. They can hit within 60 seconds of your shot front entrance and both side doors simultaneously. They need a distraction and a break in the chain of command. Your shot is the signal. The framework clicked into place, a coordinated strike where one round started everything else. Risky, but also likely the best option those people inside had. I'll need updated wind data, building schematics, and live visuals on the target areas within the hour, I said. Especially the second floor room holding the hostages' internal walls, support columns, anything that affects lines of fire. We're pulling the original plans and recent drone imagery now, the intel officer said. You'll have a live video feed from overhead. Good. Davis, we need eyes on that shooting position. I want to see the angle myself, check for any obstructions, and feel the environment. When? He asked. Now. We've got a 24-hour ultimatum, but I want our shot ready in 12. That gives us time to confirm everything and adjust before the deadline. The colonel studied me for a moment. You understand this isn't just another engagement. Those hostages are counting on you to be perfect. I understand, I said. Then make it happen. 30 minutes later, we were back in the armory. Patience was out on the bench again, and I ran through the same careful routine as before. Strip. Clean, inspect, verify. This time, though, there was an extra weight to each step. The Sot wasn't only about disrupting enemy operations. It was about giving 40 civilians a real chance of walking out alive. You good? Davis asked, watching. Thinking, I said. About what? How many ways this could fail? What happens if I'm off by just a little? What it feels like inside that building right now. You're not going to miss, he said. You can't know that. I do, he answered. I watched you make the Mirzak shot. If anyone can thread this needle, it's you. And if I don't, then Delta still goes, and we deal with it as best we can. But I'd rather they go in with you having taken a key piece off the board. He had a point. I'd be here. My job wasn't to eliminate all risk, it was to reduce it as much as possible. We finished prepping and rolled out in a standard Humvee toward the potential firing site, an old office building in a relatively quiet sector. Outside, the city showed signs of trying to move forward. Shops reopening, people repairing damage, small pieces of normal life returning around the edges of a conflict that hadn't fully left. The office block we needed had been abandoned when the fighting intensified. We parked behind it and entered carefully, checking for any surprises. Inside was chaos, frozen in place overturned desks, scattered paperwork, walls marked by old gunfire. We climbed to the 4th floor, Executive offices once, from the look of the space, larger rooms, wide windows. The kind of place where meetings had once been about budgets instead of survival. The view toward the municipal building was exactly what we needed. From our spot in an eastern corner office, we had a perfect, clear line of sight. Right across the district, the rangefinder read just over 1,800 meters, with a slight downward angle. It was a challenging shot, for sure, but definitely within the realm of what was doable. I remember turning to Davis and saying, "This will work," as I set my spotting scope on the windowsill. The municipal building swam into focus. It was 3 stories high, windows all around, with a reinforced entrance. I could see guards and makeshift barricades already in place. They were dug in. Suddenly, Davis spoke up, his voice low. "I've got movement. 2nd floor, 3rd window from the left." I shifted my scope over to where he was looking. By the time I landed on it, the window was empty, but I knew someone had been there just seconds before. The feeling of being just a split second too late is something you never get used to. "We need the drone feed," I said, my eyes still glued to the scope. Davis pulled out the tablet and connected to our overhead asset. The top-down view of the building was incredibly sharp, clear enough to pick out individual people and even what gear they were carrying. "Zoom on the 2nd floor," I instructed. The camera tightened in, and the scene became horribly clear. Through the glass, I could see a crowded space. People were sitting close together on the floor, huddled, obviously being held there. Moving around them were armed men, staying just close enough to the hostages to make any kind of direct assault a nightmare. This wasn't just a hostage situation, it was a human shield. "This is going to be tight," Davis muttered beside me. "No argument here," I replied, the words feeling heavy. We spent the next 2 hours meticulously building a complete picture of the situation. We confirmed the distance with multiple devices, getting a solid reading of about 1,800 meters. The wind was a gentle 5 to 7 knots from the west. The temperature was climbing into the mid-90s with low humidity, pretty standard for this part of the world. From a ballistic standpoint, the math was straightforward. At this range, the bullet would drop around 12 meters, which meant I'd need to dial in about 14 mils of elevation. With a mild wind, the drift would be less than a foot, very manageable. The real challenge wasn't the shot itself, but identifying exactly when and where to take it. There was no room for error. "We need a solid ID on Al-Kuwaiti," I said, my voice firm. "No room for any doubt whatsoever." "Intel's running facial recognition on the drone footage right now," Davis replied, his fingers tapping away on his tablet. "They're expecting a confirmation later today." With that, we started setting up our hide properly. We draped netting to break up our outline against the window, moved furniture around to create solid rests and better concealment. We checked our redundant comms, made sure we had extra power for the optics and tablets, and went over our planned fallback route one more time, just in case everything went sideways. Then, we settled in to watch. And wait. Through the scope, I started counting the guards. There were 6 rotating exterior sentries, and I tracked how often they changed positions, looking for a pattern. Any kind of predictable routine. I noted the patterns in the windows, too, where people moved, which blinds shifted, which rooms stayed consistently active. Every little detail could be the one that mattered. Around midday, my patience paid off. A man stepped out onto a 3rd-floor balcony. He was middle-aged, wearing tactical gear, and carried himself with an air of authority, the posture of someone used to giving orders. "That might be him," Davis said, quickly sliding over to a photo reference on his tablet. "Height and build match. We need a better angle on his face." Asifunkwe, the man turned, and his face came into partial view. It was just for a second, but it was enough. "That's all Kuwaiti," Davis confirmed a moment later, his voice tight with certainty. Facial recognition just flagged him high confidence. "That's our primary." I kept the crosshairs of my scope centered on him as he talked on a radio, looking visibly agitated. He had to know his demands were unrealistic. That time was not on his side. He was playing a losing game, but he was still dangerous. He eventually stepped back inside, disappearing from view. I marked the room mentally. 3rd floor, central section. It was likely the building administrator's office or a similar command space. A prime location, Range to that balcony? I asked, not taking my eye off the window he'd gone through. 1,814 meters, Davis said, reading the laser rangefinder. I updated my ballistic calculator with the exact value. The adjustment was minor, but in this line of work, minor details are everything. The difference between success and catastrophic failure can be measured in millimeters. The rest of the afternoon passed with more steady observation and note-taking. Vehicles came and went. We saw them moving supplies, adjusting their defenses slightly. These people were not amateurs. They were disciplined and prepared. Nightfall brought cooler air and the harsh glow of artificial light. The building's interior lit up through some of the windows, which gave us better looks into certain rooms. But it also introduced more glare and distortion to work around, making a clean shot even more complicated. The challenges just kept piling up. Later that night, Davis passed on a new piece of intel. Intel says they picked up a transmission, he reported, his face illuminated by the faint light of his screen. Al-Kuwaiti is threatening to execute a hostage at 0820 if his demands aren't met. My stomach tightened. So we're on a countdown, I said. The reality of the timeline crashing down. This was no longer a waiting game. It was a race against the clock. Delta will be staged 2 blocks out, he continued, laying out the plan. Once you take the shot, they hit all 3 entrances at once. Medical teams are on standby, and other sniper teams will cover the outer perimeter. The goal is 60 seconds from your trigger pull to full contact inside. It was a solid plan. A well-oiled machine ready to spring into action. But there was one big variable. And if he never shows in a clean window? I asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at me for hours. What if I never get the shot? Davis's response was grim, but expected. Then they go at 0700. Regardless, that the risk and expected casualties go up across the board. My shot was the key. It was the linchpin that held the entire operation together. The one action that could minimize bloodshed. The pressure was immense. The lives of the hostages, the lives of the assault team, they all hinged on me. On one single bullet. As the city slept, we kept watch. Our world narrowed down to that one building, that one man, and the dwindling hours until dawn. So we need this one clean, I said. Yeah, we really do. Somewhere after midnight, Davis shook me awake from a light doze. 3rd floor, he said. Office window. I slid to the scope. Inside the room we'd marked as his, 3 figures stood around a table. One of them clearly Al-Kuwaiti. They seemed to be going over a map or layout, gesturing sharply. Planning their next move, Davis said quietly. We watched for half an hour. When the meeting broke, the others left, and Al-Kuwaiti stayed behind. He walked to the window, stood looking out over the city, backlit by the room's light and nearly ideal profile. I could have taken the shot right then. But Delta wasn't in position, and there was no coordinated plan ready to go in behind it. Firing now might remove him, but it would give the rest of his fighters time to react however they wanted, with no one close enough to stop them quickly. Timing mattered as much as accuracy. Eventually, he stepped away and disappeared from sight. Get some rest, Davis said. I'll keep eyes on. We've got about 6 hours to go. Dawn came with a gradual lightening of the sky from black to deep blue. At 0530, I was back behind patients, running final checks. The rifle was ready. Ammunition was laid out. The scope was dialed in. Delta's in place, Davis reported. Teams on all 3 entrances. External snipers on Overwatch medics staged. Everyone is waiting on your green light. The building was fully awake now. Through the drone feed, the hostages on the 2nd floor were clearly visible tired, afraid, huddled close while their guards moved among them, tense and keyed up. At about 0615, Al-Kuwaiti appeared at his window again, a mug in hand. I've got him, I said. Confirm ID, Davis said, shifting to his glass. Confirmed. Clear view. No one in front of him. Wind is 3 knots from the west. Steady, he reported. Range 80. 14. Temperature 78. Humidity 25. Pressure 30.10. I entered the latest readings, refined my hold, and watched the tiny motions of dust and fabric to confirm the wind behavior. But I still waited. He's going to shift, I said quietly. He always does. I want him still. He finished his drink and set it aside, then picked up his radio and launched into another agitated conversation. 0630, Davis said. 30 minutes to the time he mentioned. Down on the second floor, the hostage room looked more strained by the minute. The guards there were clearly on edge. When Al-Kuwaiti ended the call, he turned fully to the window and paused, motionless for a heartbeat, framed in the glass. Taking the shot, I said. Breathing slowed, heart rate eased, and the reticle settled on his chest. Every variable range, wind, angle, air density fell into place in my mind. I exhaled to the halfway point, feeling the rifle become an extension of my body. Pressure on the trigger built smoothly. No rush, no jerk. And in that narrow slice of time between breaths and heartbeats, the world shrank to a single image. The crosshairs, the target, and the thin line of space between us. Time seemed too slow. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle recoiled into my shoulder in a familiar, controlled push. Through the scope, I followed the faint disturbance in the air as the round traveled the 1,800 meters toward its mark. At that distance, it took just under 3 seconds for the bullet to arrive. I stayed on the glass, watching Al-Kuwaiti in the window, waiting for the result. The impact landed center mass, high in the chest. He jolted back and dropped out of sight, the protective gear he wore unable to cope with the energy of a long-range precision round. Hit, Davis said. Target down. That's a confirmed kill. Delta, this is Overwatch, I transmitted. Primary target neutralized. Execute. Copy. Overwatch. Moving now, came the reply. On the drone feed, I watched the assault unfold in real time. Helicopters flared over the roof while ground teams hit all 3 entrances simultaneously. External sentries dropped almost immediately under coordinated sniper fire, and the breach teams pushed inside behind charges and flashbang grenades. Radio traffic confirmed what I was seeing brief. Intense engagements on each floor. Short bursts of gunfire followed by rapid calls of clear as Delta moved room to room. Second floor, secure. Hostages located. Came one call. Medical moving in. Third floor secure. First floor clear. All hostiles neutralized or in custody. Hostages safe. From the first breach to the final call, less than 3 minutes had passed. 40 civilians were alive and on their way out of that building because the timing and coordination had held together. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That's 2 near impossible shots in 2 days, Davis said quietly. Mirzak Tower. Tower. And Des, they're going to want your face on a recruiting poster. They can keep the posters, I said. I'd rather keep my distance. Chocolate, you say that, but this is what you do better than anyone I've ever worked with. Whether that was a job description or an identity, I wasn't sure anymore. The extraction back to base was uneventful. We broke down the hide, packed the gear, and left the building the same way we'd come, moving like it was just another day of Overwatch, instead of the end of a hostage crisis. Driving back, the city was waking up. Shops opening, children heading to school. Traffic starting to build. Most people there would only ever hear a headline about a successful rescue. The long-range shot behind it would stay a footnote, if it was mentioned at all. That was fine, recognition was never the point. The debrief time was shorter and almost relaxed by comparison. 40 hostages rescued, no civilian casualties. All militants either captured or neutralized, and minimal damage to the surrounding area. Exceptional work, the colonel said. The Mirzak mission was remarkable on its own. Today's operation may have saved more lives than we'll ever be able to count. You should both be proud of what you accomplished. Sir, I replied. I'd like to request some leave. A few weeks, maybe longer. I think I need time away from the line to process everything. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Approved. You've more than earned it. Take the time you need. If you decide to come back, we'll have work waiting. That was enough. I finished my breakfast and walked back to the cabin, thinking about those two veterans and what they'd said. Thinking about all the missions over the years, all the shots, all the lives saved by bullets placed exactly where they needed to be. This job being a sniper, being that person who makes impossible shots from impossible distances. It wasn't who I was. It was what I did. And there was a difference, a crucial difference. Who I was remained the same. Someone who believed in protecting the innocent, in stopping those who would do harm, and using my skills for something that mattered. What I did was use a rifle and a scope and mathematics to make that happen in the most efficient way possible. The weight didn't go away. The dreams didn't stop. But I found a way to carry it all, to put it in perspective, to understand that the cost was real, but so was the purpose. I stayed at the cabin for another week, using the time to really process everything. I thought about Rahman and Al-Kuwaiti, about the hostel in the street, about all the shots I'd made over my career. I thought about the people those shots had saved, the soldiers who hadn't walked into ambushes, the civilians who hadn't been caught in attacks, the hostages who'd gone home alive. I thought about Davis and our partnership, about the trust required to work that closely with someone, about how he spotted and I shot, and together we made something neither of us could do alone. I thought about the colonel and the intelligence officers and the Delta operators and all the other people who'd played their parts in these missions, who'd contributed their expertise and experience to achieving something none of us could have done individually. And I realized that while I'd been the one pulling the trigger, I hadn't been alone. I was part of something larger, a team, a mission, a purpose that extended beyond any individual contribution, that made it bearable. Not easy, never easy, but bearable. On my last day at the cabin, I packed up my few belongings and took one final walk around the lake. The water was still, perfectly calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I stood there for a long time, committing the peace of this place to memory, knowing I'd need to remember it in the hard times ahead. Because there would be hard times. There would be more missions, more shots, more faces added to the collection I carried with me. That was the nature of the job, and if I was being honest with myself, it was what I was meant to do. Not because I enjoyed it, I didn't. Not because it was easy, it never would be, but because someone had to do it, and I was good at it. And the world was full of people like Rahman and Al-Kuwaiti, who wouldn't stop unless someone stopped them. I could be that someone. I could carry that weight, and maybe, with time and perspective, and the memory of quiet lakes and still water, I could do it without losing myself completely in the process. I called the colonel from the road. "Sir, this is Overwatch. I'm ready to return to duty." "Good to hear from you," he replied, genuine warmth in his voice. "How are you doing?" "Better. Needed the time away. Needed to get my head straight. But I'm ready to come back." "I'm glad. We've got a situation developing that could use your particular skill set. No urgency. This one's in the planning stages, but when you get back, we'll brief you." "Understood, sir. I'll be there in 48 hours. Looking forward to it." "And son, what you did with Rahman and Al-Kuwaiti, those were exceptional shots, under extraordinary circumstances. Don't let anyone tell you different. You saved a lot of lives. Thank you, sir. That means a lot." We hung up, and I continued driving, heading back toward the base, back toward my gear and my rifle and the life I'd chosen. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and straight, disappearing into the horizon. I thought about that shot on Raman 2146 meters through variable wind and heat shimmer, 3.2 seconds of flight time, perfect impact. I thought about the mathematics of it, the precision required, the way everything had come together in that one perfect moment when the bullet found its target. And I thought about what it had cost, not just the planning and preparation and risk, but the emotional and psychological toll of taking a life, even a life that needed taking, the weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that I'd ended someone's existence with a decision measured in milliseconds. But I also thought about what it had accomplished, the attacks that wouldn't happen, the soldiers who wouldn't die in ambushes, the families who'd get to stay together because Rahman wasn't around to plan more operations. The hostages who'd gone home because I'd put a bullet exactly where it needed to be when it needed to be there. Balance. That's what it came down to. The cost versus the purpose. The weight versus the mission. The personal toll versus the lives saved. It would never be easy. Some nights I'd still wake up seeing faces through my scope. Some days I'd still question whether I'd made the right choices. But I'd learned something important during these weeks away. I could carry the weight. I could do this job and still be human. Still have a conscience. Still care about the lives I took and the lives I saved. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask. The sun was setting as I drove through the base gates 2 days later. The guard checked my ID, waved me through, and I parked near the barracks that had been my home for the better part of 2 years. Everything looked exactly the same. Same buildings, same vehicles, same organized chaos of military life. But I was different. Changed in ways I was still figuring out. Davis met me at the barracks, grinning. "Welcome back, Ghost. Thought you might have gone civilian on us. Thought about it, but this is where I belong, at least for now." "Good. Because we've got work to do. Intel's been tracking a new target, high value. Difficult location. Shot that'll make Ramad look like target practice." I raised an eyebrow. "Longer than 2,100 meters. Much longer. Think 26. Maybe 2,700. Conditions are going to be brutal. Mountain environment, thin air, temperature extremes. They're calling it impossible." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Impossible is just a word for shots we haven't made yet. That's what I told them. "Come on, briefing's in an hour. Let's get you caught up." We walked toward the briefing room, and I felt something settle into place. Not peace, exactly, but purpose. This was what I did. This was the weight I carried, and I'd keep carrying it for as long as I could. For as long as the missions needed doing and the shots needed taking. Because somewhere out there, someone was planning an attack. Someone was targeting innocents. Someone needed to be stopped. And stopping them would require precision in mathematics, and a bullet placed exactly right from an impossible distance. And I was ready for that. Ready to look through the scope to do the math, to make the calculations that separated success from failure, life from death. Ready to take the shot. The briefing room door opened, and I stepped inside, back into the world of satellite imagery and target profiles and mission parameters. Back into the life I'd chosen, with all its costs and all its purpose. My name is Overwatch. I'm a sniper, and this is what I do. The siege of Merzak Tower, the longest shot I ever recorded, taught me that, and I'll never forget it.